for this recording.
All right, so welcome guys to Site Owner Academy, CRAs and site selection visits in clinical research. How's it going, Chris?
Going well, Dan. I like how Carlos, I guess you're the one that's going to have to narrate this whole thing because it just says by Dan Severa.
Oh, I just saw that now too. So Chris Opper is not involved in this slide at all.
Not on this one.
Hey, Dan Severa is not very involved in this slide either. Okay, so CRAs and site selection visits in research. Right now, we're going to start seeing a lot of site selection visits. We already have been seeing a lot of site selection visits with virtual site selection visits, with the pent-up demand for the new studies starting up. So, yeah, I know Monica's doing one today, one tomorrow, one next week, just for one of our sites, and then we have other sites doing more as well. So this is good stuff. So what do you think about site selection visits, Chris? Do you still get nervous when you're about to have a site selection visit?
Not really. I mean, if it's a study that I really, really, really want, maybe a little bit then, but for the most part, no.
Okay. But when you first started out, were you nervous?
Of course.
As a new site owner?
Of course.
What were you nervous about?
Every aspect you could think of. We're going to say something wrong, and we're going to say something incorrect, stupid, dumb, not know the answer to a question, and then all of this culminating into we don't get the study.
So your fears, and did your fears ever prove to be true?
No, not really. I mean, of course, we've had site selection visits in which we didn't get the study, but not that I'm aware of. Did it ever have anything to do with what I said?
It was always something else.
Right. There's only two site selection visits. Well, actually, there's three. There's three site selection visits I can recall in which we didn't get the study. One was, which it was really funny. I had Carlos fill out the feasibility questionnaire for the study.
Yeah.
And I don't even know why they came to our site if they knew that these numbers were fabricated, but he put that we could randomize like 6,000 patients for a schizophrenia study.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and they came, they did the site selection visit, but when I explained to her, I think he was just confused, and that's how many people are in the general area with schizophrenia. She just wasn't buying any of this. So we didn't get that study.
Wow. So that's
actually
a good point. But don't put crazy numbers on your survey, and pay attention to what you're filling out, because he probably just thought, okay, he probably thought the question was, how big is your database?
Right.
Like your entire database or something.
Right.
And so he put 6,000, when in reality, that was another question, and you can make mistakes like that.
Absolutely. But even there, 6,000 in your database of schizophrenics is quite large. Regardless, you're right. I mean, don't put ridiculous numbers for your answers. But really, why would they even come out, though? Why would they even schedule the site selection visit if they know these numbers can't be correct? You understand what I'm saying? Very odd.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe they'd never really looked at what the answers were until the CRA came.
I suppose
and
that's
maybe if the CRA is like a contractor, she would still want to come out.
Right.
Yeah, so just interesting.
And then, of course, there's other dynamics at play here as far as why you may or may not get a study. And another study we didn't get was that cocaine study, but we were in a really rough neighborhood at the time. and the CRA just said, I'm not confident giving you the study here.
Okay,
So,
yeah, I remember that study.
yeah.
All
So, I
right.
mean,
Well,
there's things out of your control as well.
yeah, just proof that you don't necessarily want to like buy into your fears, but it's normal to have them.
Absolutely.
And in the book, I just finished reading a book called The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins, and what she says actually, it's a really good book, but what she says specifically about fear and anxiety is, hey, instead of trying to fight it, because it's always going to happen. Like, she uses the example of public speaking, but we can use the example of site selection visits. I mean, you're always going to be nervous. You can't really talk yourself out of it. So rather than fighting it, just go with it. Say, you know what? I'm excited, because nervous and excitedness are the same thing. It's just how your brain processes it. And if your brain doesn't have a reason for something, it starts to panic because it starts looking for problems. So rather than being nervous, she just counts back from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm excited. And at least you're giving your brain a reason to focus on why you're feeling this way. Because sometimes being nervous is just a negative cycle. Like, you're nervous, and then you're feeling nervous. Now you're feeling more nervous because you're feeling nervous. And if you just transfer that to being excited, at least your brain will have a reason why it's feeling that way. Because when it doesn't have a reason for it, it starts panicking.
Sure. So, are you saying that you still get nervous for site selection visits?
If it's a study I really want, yeah.
Okay, so you're like me.
Yeah, if it's a regular study, I'd know. But, and now I don't really have to do them. Like, it's usually Monica or somebody else.
Sure.
But when I have to be like the main person, I still get a little nervous. I wouldn't say nervous, but I think I channel it more into being excited, and then I talk too much during the
Well,
SSBs.
I
I get
think
over it.
I think with as with anything else, I think when you're unaccustomed to something, you're more likely to panic or be nervous. I think the more that
Yeah,
you do something, the less likely you are to be nervous or panic.
I think so too. But some people are just wired like to always feel nervous.
Sure.
I probably fall more into that spectrum. But the way I make up for it is just talking a lot, because I guess I've been doing the I'm excited thing without knowing what I was doing. But the
Doing
book
it
kind of
naturally.
explained. Yeah, the book gave the strategy for what I was already doing, but I was like, hey, that makes sense, because that's what I kind
Sure.
of do anyway.
Sure. That makes sense.
So it's a good book, 5-Second Rule. It's a good listen. I actually listened to it on Audible.
All right, so we have 4 slides to do in 21 minutes. You have to be off at 12:30, right?
Oh yeah, this will be a piece of cake,
All right.
and people will hopefully they enjoy this replay. So,
So,
hey, maybe this is a good enough for a podcast too. I might put this on the podcast. A little
sure.
Site Owner Academy preview, and for the YouTube as well. Why not?
Yep.
So, what's the next slide? Did we go through this site selection visit slide already?
No.
One of the things that monitors encounter during site selection visits is that many sites either overlooked or did not have access to the inclusion-exclusion criteria when they completed the feasibility surveys. Now, you're supposed to have access to this. So probably the former is the more likely culprit. The sites overlooked the IE criteria. So one of the reasons sites complete feasibility surveys without considering IE criteria is they're waiting to hear more details about a study during the site selection visit. So you're supposed to fill out the IE criteria, but sometimes they don't give you that. And so this is the whole purpose of doing SSVs, is really to confirm what you've been putting down on your feasibility surveys.
So,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure I've filled out feasibility questionnaires in the past in which I did not have access to all of the IE. They just gave you the points that you needed to be aware of for filling out the feasibility questionnaire.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's happened, where you don't get like a protocol synopsis. They give you the actual inclusion exclusion criteria within the feasibility questionnaire. Like they say, consider these 3 points of IE. Would you be able to enroll patients? Something like that.
Right. Hmm. Okay.
But I'm not positive. I wouldn't bet my life on this, but I'm fairly certain that's happened before.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So next slide. At site selection visits, sites that are not familiar with study criteria have the opportunity to revise enrollment projections based on exclusion-inclusion criteria that was reviewed. And this is really done with generally like when the monitor presents the protocol, they'll do it with the PI ideally.
Mm-hmm.
And what they want to get from the PI is how many patients they think they can enroll within the next 6 months, 12 months, etc. And then also, very important, how quickly they think they can randomize their first patient. That's a big, Chris, you and I spoke to just about every CRO at Bio last year in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they all said this last bullet point here was super important, how quickly they can enroll their first patient.
Sure. And I mean, we even before discussing this with all the different CROs, um, we've had direct examples of this at our sites, right? Where you'll get a call if you haven't enrolled a patient after about 3 months into the study. Hey, we're gonna have to shut your site down if if you don't enroll somebody relatively quickly, and they give you usually a time frame. Doesn't always happen, but that has happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In which they want you to enroll fairly quickly. Otherwise, they'll consider shutting your site down.
That's right. Very, very important. So these things will definitely come up. They come up on the feasibility survey, and they'll come up again during the site selection visit. And, this is when you also, as the site, you have the opportunity, if you're the PI or if you're the coordinator, you have the opportunity to ask questions about the study. Show that you're interested. Try to come up with something like a question. And if the monitor doesn't have an answer, guess what they do? They write it in their report, and it becomes an action item on the monitoring report for the sponsor. So then the sponsor knows, hey, this site's interested, and maybe it's actually a good question that they haven't considered. And then maybe they have to revise the IE criteria or something. Who knows?
Yep.
But it's always better to actually be interested in the study, if at all possible, and ask good questions.
Well,
I've done site selections as a CRA, and just about every single time, actually, the PI asks questions. So that's a good thing. And sometimes the other staff ask questions too, like the coordinators or the sub-Is. So it's always good to have an interest in the study. Don't just sit there and listen and nod your head, which is the temptation if you're new at this. I understand if you don't have much experience with research, the temptation is to just be quiet and not say much. But you don't need experience in research to ask questions about that therapeutic indication. So encourage your PI. Hey, I know Mr. or Mrs. PI, you don't have very much research experience, but feel free to ask questions about the medication or the medical condition as it relates to the protocol or the IE criteria, because you don't need research experience to ask those kind of questions. Right?
yeah.
And usually people are extra nervous because they don't have as much experience either in research altogether or in that particular therapeutic indication.
I'd also add that I think it can be difficult for very experienced sites as well. I'm just speaking from my own shoes here. After doing the same indication, same indication site selection visit for the umpteenth time, it gets rather boring, right?
How many
So
times did you do it?
I'm just saying many, many times, right? If you've done the same
Oh,
site selection visit for, let's just say schizophrenia, since we've already discussed schizophrenia, say you've done, this is your 15th time doing a schizophrenia site selection visit, it gets rather boring.
right. No, I was just joking about umpteenth.
Right. Just
Is
some
it
random
actual
number.
number? Is
No,
it
that's
actual
just a
number?
random number. But the
Oh,
point is you're right. To show engagement, it's for anything, not just site selection visits, but for anything. To be engaged shows that you're genuinely interested, or maybe you're good at pretending you're interested, right? But it shows that you're interested,
right.
and people respond to that better, right, than to see people yawning and uninterested. That
And
doesn't
you do see
promote.
that. You do see that happen too. People yawning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you can attest to this. Any investigator meeting I've ever been to, it's a real struggle to stay awake if you sit in those
Right.
meetings all day. I mean, it really is,
Right.
and that's true of most people in the meetings. Because if you look around, it looks like everybody's half asleep.
Right.
So, um,
Yeah. Those things, you know, uh, investigator meetings are different. I think it's more. It goes less noticed if you're not interested there.
sure,
Um, but when the spotlight's on you at a site selection visit, I mean, there's no one really else there. It's you, and you should be interested
oh, absolutely. And
in what they're talking about.
you're not going to lose the study at an investigator meeting for being unengaged or
No, but it is
disengaged
possible. It is possible to almost lose a study at an investigator meeting. I have
for other
personal
reasons.
experience.
Right, for other reasons.
Yeah.
And you better
Yeah, so
clarify, Dan, this isn't something you did.
no, it's not something I did, but something I had to deal with. That's a good
Yeah,
episode for another day. Good podcast.
absolutely.
Um, okay, so I think we're done with slide 3. Slide 4. You want to read slide 4?
I'll do slide 5.
Okay, you'll do slide 5? Okay. Let's do
Sorry, I
slide
just put
4.
some food in my mouth, so I don't want to read.
Okay, reassessing site capabilities. So, site selection visits are the appropriate time for monitors to ask the PI if the numbers on the feasibility survey are reflective of what you put in the feasibility. So basically, they're confirming, is what you put in the feasibility survey accurate? That's really what the monitor are there to do, not just for patient population and demographics, but also they're going to do like an actual tour of the site, and they're going to look at all the staff members, at least their CVs if they're not there in person, and look at their GCPs and look at the experience that they all have. And then they're going to ask the PI again. You know, basically they're going to ask the PI and the coordinator to confirm everything that's on the survey.
Yep.
And so it's important that you and your PI or whomever else is going to be talking are on the same page. So if possible, try to have a copy of your feasibility survey that you did. And I know these days the vast majority of them are done online, right? On like SurveyMonkey type of things.
Yeah, electronic paper.
Uh,
But you can save a copy
so,
usually.
yeah, usually you can, but if you can't, you should just be screenshotting each time you screenshot your screen each time you finish a page. That's always a good practice to have, unless you can remember the numbers and you guys are always on the same page. But when sites are newer, and the temptation is, or not the temptation, the tendency is to kind of be off, like the staff member are not all on the same page, and you don't want to give off that impression that everybody thinks something differently about your site database and the experience. Like if the PI says that they only have 1 year of research experience and the coordinator says they have 10, you know, something's off. I mean, make sure you guys are on the same page. Same thing with patient numbers. If the PI says, hey, we only have 100 patients in our database for this inclusion-exclusion criteria, and the coordinator says we have 1,000, what's the explanation? Maybe the PI understands it based on the IE criteria, and the coordinator is thinking overall how many subjects. But you have to communicate these things to the monitor, because discrepancies like this are usually red flags. And I guess we should have started this presentation with this statement to make you a little less nervous. If they are already doing a site selection visit, you pretty much already have the study. It's just a formality.
Well,
unless you screw it up. And the way you screw it up is by demonstrating that you don't know what you're talking about, and that you're not interested in the study, that you can't enroll, and that you don't know what you're doing. Those are basically the reasons for not getting the study at the site selection visit.
Well, and what we were discussing on the first slide, I mean, there's sometimes reasons outside of your control as well. Like, again, that cocaine study and being in the wrong neighborhood for a cocaine study, right? If your office building is in an area that's not conducive to the study, then yeah, you may not get that study when the CRA comes out and sees this.
Correct.
So there can be some reasoning why you would get the study outside of your control, but that's very limited.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're
Right.
making good progress here. So the final slide.
So we're on slide 5 now?
Yeah, we're on slide 5.
Okay, so additional considerations. I'll keep my word and read the slide 5 here. Additional considerations. The number of studies that a site has can impact the amount of time that a site can dedicate to a new study. Absolutely. So if a site has one study, obviously they can dedicate all their time to that one study. If a site has 10 studies and they're all currently enrolling, well, all 10 are probably going to be impacted. And we've done videos on this in the past, right? On how to determine which study should get the majority of your attention as a site.
Yeah, we've done webinars on this actually.
Yeah. But essentially,
maybe it's time for one of those again sometime soon.
Sure. But I think really, first and foremost, it boils down to economics for the site, right? So, which one's going to have the greatest economic impact on the site is probably which is the study that's going to get the most attention. If a site has one study in which they could make $2 million off of, and then they have a bunch of other studies that they can make $10,000 off of, I can tell you which study is probably going to get the most attention. No?
Right. Of course.
Right.
I mean, budget is, I wouldn't say everything, but it's a large portion of where the sites put their priorities. I mean, remember, most of these sites are for-profit institutions, outside of universities and academic centers. But yeah, most sites are for-profit. So obviously they exist to be in business, and they exist to make a profit. But there are other factors as well.
Of course.
Namely the ability to enroll those kind of patients, and also the difficulty of the study itself, the complexity of the study.
And I would say there's probably one other factor there. That's the interest of maybe the PI on the study. I mean, there's many doctors that are actually very interested in the research. So they may have a little bit more interest in enrolling in those studies in which they're obviously more interested in. That would impact it as well, I think. Like, for example, we have a PI that was interested in a study, not that he really helped enroll in it, but I don't know if you recall, but we had an Alzheimer's study. Was Alzheimer's, Dan? Global? The PI?
Alzheimer's study? Okay.
there was a study that I don't want to say his name, but that our PI was interested in.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Right? Was that Alzheimer's?
Yeah, it was. He actually brought it on. He had a really good relationship with the sponsor. So which is very unusual for him because he kind of just lets us pick whatever studies we want.
Right.
But this particular case, he really liked the sponsor. I guess he had a good relationship with the sponsor, and he assumed that I mean, he had no idea how difficult it would be to enroll. All he heard was the diagnosis. And
Yep.
he told them, oh, yeah, we got tons of these kind of patients, which is true. We did, but we didn't look at the complexity of the study. I mean, yeah, like maybe he had like 200 patients with that diagnosis, but like maybe 2 of them would qualify for the study.
Right. Right.
And these are not patients that are interested in participating to begin with, and plus you have to deal with the families and all kinds of things. So that's a perfect example, actually, of the numbers don't necessarily mean you're going to do well on that study.
Mm-hmm. Right. The general numbers.
It's a perfect example. Perfect example.
Also, an example of a PI being interested in a given study, um, and putting their weight behind that study, but not really understanding what's all involved. But anyhow, so moving on, coordinator time should be taken into account based on the number of studies that the site has. Right. So it's funny. I just had this conversation. We took on a new client. I don't know if you recall Dan, but he's a pilot in the military. Um, he was just asking me yesterday, how do we determine when a coordinator is starting to be overworked? And I told him we've done webinars on this, podcasts on this, a number of things on this, and review that. But essentially, what would you say is the quick version of how to determine if a coordinator is overworked? Ask them.
Yeah, that's the way so there's a couple ways. One of them requires you to actually be involved in the day-to-day functioning of that site. So if you're there and you're in the trenches, you should know. I mean, chances are you're working, at least you're overseeing very closely your coordinator and the workflow and what's going on and what the challenges are. I remember back in the early days of me running my site, I probably stopped being as involved like around 2013, right around the time that we started our site network, actually. Mm-hmm. So I sacrificed being involved in the trenches for growth, which is good. I mean, I don't regret that. But, you know, when I was in the trenches, I understood when a coordinator would tell me, like, I already knew when they were overworked. And
Before they even told you.
Yeah, I was just waiting for them to tell me.
Right.
I already knew it. And so I was like, when they told me, I'm like, yeah, I know, you know, or sometimes I'd be proactive and say, look, I know you're working a lot. Like, do you need me to hire someone else, or do you need me to like do more myself with you? Like, tell me what we need, because we're not going to not enroll more patients.
Right.
So let me know what we need. I can hire someone, but that's, you know, it takes more work as well. I mean, having those kind of discussions, if you actually know what's going on, you're not going to be surprised. Now, me today, I have no idea if a coordinator is overworked. I mean, I truly have no idea.
Right.
And I should be talking more to them. Like, ideally, I would be talking to them on a weekly basis. Hey, what's been going on? What's your workflow? But it requires some trust on that person, that they're not just telling you they're overworked when they're not, or maybe they think they're overworked, but it's not really being overworked. That's just normal. So it's a lot harder when you're not managing directly the study, and I think you're now relying on monitoring letters, looking at the action items, how many are still ongoing and for how long they've been ongoing. That's a really good sign. I mean, if you have open action items ongoing for like 6 months, either that coordinator's not doing the work for some reason or they don't have time. And so that's more of a hint in combination with having these conversations, but nothing replaces just being there in the trenches. I don't know what you have to say about this.
Well, I agree. I think you need to have a fairly good relationship with these individuals in terms of trust, because if you get a really bad monitoring report for a study, is it the coordinator's overworked, or is it that you need to fire the coordinator, right? Which is it? So
Right.
you need to be able to have um, some sort of trust there in which you can rely on what the coordinator is telling you if you're not going to be involved at all as a site owner. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think if that's the case, you probably want to have a conversation. Hey, let me know if there's ever anything that I need to do for you, or we need to hire somebody. Let me know, right? You want to be
Absolutely.
proactive to a degree and let them know that these resources are available should they be needed. You need to let me know.
Absolutely. I guess that's a good place to end it. I have another interview coming up,
All right.
but we can stop the recording. And thank you very much, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. And it was a very busy site owner academy today.